Distinguished Lecture Series. This is our second year hosting a Distinguished Lecture Series, and this is our first talk of the second year series. We are very honored to have Professor Richard Kern from UC Berkeley to give us a talk today, and let me say a few words about Professor Kern. He is a professor of French in University of California, Berkeley, and in the last year he's also the acting chair of the department. And since 2006, he has been the director of the Berkeley Language Center. He is the author of a number of books and numerous articles in the book chapters, which I am not going to read because it's going to take up the entire hour. I'm only going to mention two books. One book was published by Oxford University Press in 2000. It's called Literacy and the Language Teaching. And most recently, 2015, the book Language Literacy and the Technology by Cambridge University Press. Now, for the students in the audience, if someone gets a book published by Oxford or Cambridge University, that is a very distinguished and established scholar. If you get published by both Oxford and Cambridge, you're pretty cool. You're pretty cool. Yeah.
Or they didn't like you in the first place.
Yeah. And a bit of my personal connection to Professor Kern. We serve on some committees in the field. But also, you know, if you are an academic in the field, you are usually attracted to two kinds of people. One kind is the people who do exactly what you do in your exact field, and you have a lot to share with, right? Another kind of people is that they do work that's so important, that's so exciting, that you wish you could do, but you don't have either the ability or the opportunity to do that. And Professor Kern is the second type. So he's somebody I wish I could be, but I cannot be. So instead of trying to pretend to do what I cannot do, I have invited him to speak to us. And for those of you who cannot be here today, we have a wonderful recording that's being made, right? So, Professor Kern.
Thank you, Professor Huff, for having invited me. It's really wonderful to be here today, and I've gotten to get to know a number of you already, and I look forward to discussions after the talk if you're able to stick around a bit. So what I'd like to do today is, basically my talk's going to be in two parts. The first part is going to be developing a general model for thinking about communication and the role that technology plays in communication. And then the second part will be talking about implications for language education and how we can think about preparing our students for new technologies that we don't even know what they're going to be yet, but that our students who are coming through our educational systems now will encounter in their personal and professional lives. So I want to start off with a very traditional and canonical model of communication, and many of you may have seen this image. This is from Ferdinand de Saussure's Cours de Linguistique Générale, course in general linguistics. And this has been a cornerstone of many communication models throughout the 20th century at least. And the idea here is that person A has a concept or an idea in his head. He encodes that notion, that concept, that message in language. And because person B shares that language, person B is able to decode the language and arrive at the same concept that person A did. So it's kind of like a fax machine where you encode it, it goes through the phone wires, comes out the other end, and voila, you've got the document that you put in more or less with a few distortions here and there. But so that's a model that has been canonized in a sense in many textbooks. but that oversimplifies communication in a number of ways. And so I wanted to give some examples of ways in which we can't really think about language as having an a priori meaning. In other words, something that you put through this pipe of language and then comes out the other side the same way. That there are so many intersubjective, situational, contextual variables that come into play that we can't really say that any given sign means something in any kind of absolute sense. We really have to talk about how meaning emerges and how meaning is constructed by the participants in a given act of communication, which involves given signs, but then they get used, appropriated by individuals in particular ways. So let's take a look at the first example here. So A says, well, maybe you guys can read this. So what is A saying? Because this is not in any kind of standard orthographic system. But what is the message here?
What's up?
Okay, and then the answer? Not much, how about you? Okay, so this is something that you guys are great at reading. It's actually very complex because what we've got is we have a phonological representation of what is, which is two words, but represented as one phonological string, and then an iconic symbol. It's not anything having to do with phonology, but an arrow pointing up. So we think of that as up. So now already we're dealing with two different systems of representation. Phonological, referring to not standard English, but a very colloquial spoken form of English. And if you are an English learner who has only learned what is up, you know, what is, this becomes undecipherable. Okay, and then the answer is using yet another system. It's neither phonological nor iconic. It's taking abbreviations of the first letter of each word. So already in this very simple example, we've got three symbolic systems operating that people have to process, and they have to know where to shift from phonological to iconic to abbreviation using initial letters of a string that they have to have in their head. So this is anything but simple. It's extremely complex when you think of the processing involved. And it's the kind of thing that does not lend itself well to the canonical notion that there are just, you know, signs for everything, and we just have to share the right signs, and when we pass them through the pipe from one to another, we activate the same notions. You have to know an awful lot besides the language in order to process this. I got a homeworks now. This is from a student who was talking about the language that she develops with her sister. So what is she saying? What do you think? I've got to do my homework now, right. But what she's done is she has turned homework into a verb, but it's a curious verb because it ends with an S. So instead of saying, I got a homework, in other words, I got to do my homework, I got a homework, it's I got a homeworks, which is very idiosyncratic, does not fit, it's not an established sign, and yet her sister understood perfectly because she and her sister have worked out this language. So it's systematic, it's shared, but at a very idiosyncratic level, something that Saussure was not talking about at all. Okay, now this next one is a bumper sticker on a car that my neighbor has. So he's got a ski rack on his car, and then on the bumper it says Carpe Diem. Now this is obviously new to the Romans. I mean, they never, you know, they never had this. But, you know, by the same token, he doesn't speak any Latin at all, and I know that. So what's going on here? Well, you've got a formulaic expression of Carpe Diem, and then a cute, you know, swapping of a few consonants, and voila, you've got a clever bumper sticker for Let's Go Skiing. But this is, again, something that has been done as individual invention. This is not something that, if it were written in graffiti, you know, on the wall of that building over there, it wouldn't make any sense because there's no context for skiing, and people would wonder what is being talked about. It's not something that you can utter if I came to you and said, "Carpe Skium," you would have no clue of what I was talking about. The only way it makes sense is when you've got the context of bumper sticker, ski rack. You know, some people have got, you know, some bumper stickers I've seen since have got pictures of mountains and snow and skis and so on and so forth. So you get the idea through the context, but not through the sign itself. The next one is from the campaign for Obama, you know, a really clever expression, Obamanos, taking the Spanish, Vámonos, let's go, but then melding in Obama, so let's go with Obama. A very clever invention. The thing is that the model where everything has got a sign, a sort of preordained, prefab sign that we share as tools with one another doesn't account for this kind of individual invention. Did you get the orange juice I made for you? This sounds really transparent and something that could go through the pipeline. But as it turns out, the particular way it was used did not mean what you think it means. Anyone want to venture a guess? Did you get the orange juice I made for you? This was a 17-year-old girl that was writing about marijuana. And because she was writing it in a place where her parents could see her writing, she was texting her friends, she and her friends would often replace drug terms with ordinary household things. And they would know immediately if she said something like orange juice or vacuum cleaner or something like that, that wasn't what she was talking about at all, but that she was covering up what she was really talking about. And they really did understand what she was talking about, but the parents would never know. So the idea is that we can use language in certain ways that are very idiosyncratic, that have nothing to do with the canonical standard meanings, and yet they still work because people develop conventions in context where these kinds of things will work. Okay, so what I'm going to do is talk just a few minutes about the notion of design of meaning. Design has to do with the conception, the planning, and the shaping of some artifact for some intended purpose. And language use is one thing that can be designed. So what we're going to be talking about is material resources, social resources, and individual resources. And I'll start by talking about material resources. This is where technologies come in, because all kinds of technologies are, they require some kind of material infrastructure, and then the technology has to do with the know-how that people have to make use of those resources to do things. So for example, just having a computer and just having it doesn't get you very far if you don't know how to operate. So there's a whole lot of procedural knowledge that goes along with the material artifact. So let's look at how language gets used in different material contexts. So you've all seen this kind of thing where, well, first of all, what is this saying? Pedestrian crossing. Okay, so we've got all kinds of abbreviation going on here. And so, again, we've got multiple systems going on, because this is taking the icon for a cross. It's not the abbreviation, it's taking an icon, but then it's got this phonological representation coming after this. Now, if you were a foreigner, you might say, Xing, Xingped. Okay, I don't know what Xingped. Is this only for Asian people on the road? I don't know what's going on. Okay, so then we've got a straightforward abbreviation down here. But look at the order. Okay, crossing head. Now, that's the opposite of what it usually is. But the idea behind the designer's idea anyway, is that as you're approaching in your car, you first encounter this, and then you encounter this. As you roll, this is 1, and then this is 2. So you get this ordering, which I've never figured out, because when I look at this, I always start, the uppermost is like the top of the page, and then I read down, even on a road, and so I always see the far off thing as first. But anyway, the logic is that you're supposed to encounter this and then encounter this. But then when you have the same message on a sign that is held vertically, then you have the same thing, but it's in the flipped order, because the assumption is that you are going to be reading this as you would read a normal page top to bottom. So the design here has to do with the material placing of the language and how you are anticipated to process that material. Same thing here when you have this written, because the idea is that you're reading it how? Through your rear view mirror. And when you see things written in your rear view mirror, this will look like ambulance. But it's not designed for when you're standing in front of the vehicle. It's designed for when it's howling, the siren is howling behind you, and you glance up at your mirror and in an instant can see ambulance. So again, a question of how language gets designed for different purposes. Okay, the next thing is social resources, that all kinds of language, other semiotic systems, social practices, conventions, cultural values, and norms come into play in the design of meaning. And our lives are governed by signs like this that tell us what we can do, what we can't do. So we know that in this case we cannot enter this particular roadway. But then this can be, the individual component comes in, and these conventional signs can become now new signs. And here we now look at this rectangular space in the middle as some kind of passageway through which monsters might emerge. Now the whole idea here is that once you have seen this sign, it's in a way difficult to go back to the original sign without some little trace of this imaginary world, of monsters coming through the passageway. So the thing is that as people invent with signs, they leave traces that people keep as resonances in their heads. Okay, so that's the individual component is very important here, because it brings a whole aesthetic, imaginary, creative side, very subjective side to language use. And the point is that all of these interact, that the social interacts with the material, which interacts with the individual resources, all interacting actively in the design process. So let's just take a look at how some of this works out in language that you guys probably know a lot about. So this is the same thing we have in English for later, okay, where you're combining letters and numbers. But this seems to cut across lots and lots of languages. So we're still dealing with English here with 143. Does anyone know what 143 is? There's a song, that a popular song, whose chorus is 143. I mean, yeah. Yeah, it's I love you. Okay, so Patrick, how do you get I love you out of 143? Because that is right on. Uh-huh. You heard it in a song. Okay. Okay. Well, it has to do with the number of letters. So I has 1 letter, love has 4 letters, and you have 3 letters. Again, a whole nother system. A whole nother system for figuring this out. Okay, so now we're going to move to Arabic with 786. Any ideas? Bismillah al-Rahim. I can't pronounce it very well, but this is a standard Arabic phrase, and it has to do with numerology, the Abjadi system of numerology. And so Bismillah al-Rahman al-Rahim is often abbreviated as 786 because it's so succinct. How about for the Chinese speakers? This is used as a sign-off on emails or chats.
See you.
Yeah, see you. So how do you get to see you? Because, well, first you have to pronounce it in Chinese. So that would be ba, ba.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, which sounds like English, bye-bye. So here we're into the multilingual dimension because we've got a numeral representation of a certain pronunciation in Chinese, which sounds like English, but is being sent back to a Chinese language context, so that it's going through the English filter and then back to Chinese. Okay, so any Korean speakers here? Okay, so how about the next one? 8 is pal, and then the 2 is I, so pali, pali, which is quickly, quickly, right? Okay, so hurry up, quick, quick, quick. And then this is also Korean, so it looks just like a number, but Jeonsa for angel, right? So if you want to be endearing, to your girlfriend, you can write her, you can call her 1004. Okay, let's move to Japanese. So how about Japanese?
Thank you.
Right. Okay. So you knew that one right off the bat. No. This is another one that has to go through English. It has to go because it sounds like thank you in English, but then goes back to a Japanese. It's used in Japanese. Yeah, thank you. And which is the same thing with Chinese, where you have san kyu. So this and this are equivalencies. But the interesting thing is you're drawing on different conventions, different pools of resources in each of these. For instance, in this one, for a Chinese speaker, okay, even this is drawing on Arabic numerals rather than the 3-line notation for 3 as you would find. So you're using a foreign system, Arabic numerals, Roman script, to talk about Chinese, to produce something that sounds like English so that you can use it back in Chinese again. So it's tremendously complicated, but people do this all the time, and it's automatic. Okay, so 6 and 16 are sei and sedici in Italian, and this overlaps with verbs of knowing and also pronouns in reflexive verbs and so forth, so that you can use, so sei would be you are, sei, and sedici would be if you know.
If you say.
Hmm?
If you say.
Sei.
Sedici.
Sedici.
So, sedici means if you say.
If you say. If you say. Yeah. Then we've got, this is again back to Chinese.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Right, right. Well, this is just using the pinyin. Well, no, this is not pinyin right here. I took off my pinyin example because that's too common. But yeah, this is used. I've had a lot of students that have used this in their. This is my favorite right here. So, any ideas of what this is saying?
Is it also in Chinese?
Yeah. Okay. So, what does it mean in Chinese?
Like, I'm pretty sad.
Yeah. Yeah. Because.
In Chinese, we pronounce 5 in
Woo,
so it sounds
woo,
like
woo.
you crying.
Right. So there's association between the woo, woo, woo and crying. It doesn't mean that, but there's that association. It's kind of onomatopoetic. Now, does anyone speak Thai here? In Thai, this is ha, ha, ha. So you get, so this is laughter in Thai, and this is crying in Chinese. But it's all using Arabic numerals. Again, you know, these signs are not fixed in their values in any absolute sense. It depends on which cultural system and which symbolic system you are accessing. And then the last one, we've got some Korean speakers here, right? Okay, so these are very common. These are all variants of one another. These are all synonyms. Any explanation?
I think the first one, I know first one and the third one is, the first one is like regretful or resentment.
Yes, yes.
Feeling down.
And right, right. So can you explain that?
That's the shape of a person actually kneel down
Yeah.
forward.
So this is the head. This is the back, the arms, and then the legs right there. Do you see the person? And can you see the same person here, but in a slightly modified form? And then this is the really short form, where you just go from head to body, scrunched up, and then the legs coming out behind. So this is kneeling down, and often with a connotation of disappointment or regret.
Wouldn't that originate in Japanese or the tail or?
I don't know whether it originated in Japanese. I know that it's used very widely in Korean, and I don't know in Japanese.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never met anyone. When I take this to my Japanese colleagues, they say we don't do that. But that may be because they're older. So I don't know. It could very well have originated in Japanese. But that's part of the point, is that these things, migrate. And so what gets developed, whether it developed, in a Japanese context or a Korean context, the point is that these things spread through yet another form of culture, which is internet culture. And so these things get picked up by people who don't even know a word of Korean, but they think it's really clever, and so they start using it in Swedish or English, or some language that's completely different. And that's one of the fascinating things, is that it takes on a new life. Okay, so so Agnes, you'll have to correct my pronunciation of this, but Zhangfu, is that? Okay, so for government or administration, these are abbreviations using Roman alphabet that are commonly used. So that one is pretty straightforward because it's taking syllables of Chinese and putting it in the Roman alphabet. But then these next ones are more complicated. Widely, is anyone a gamer? Yeah. Okay. So, you know what this is? Yeah. Player kill. Yeah. Yeah. So again, we're going through English, but then back to Chinese. How about PS? This is not in gaming so much. But
Using
Photoshop. Yeah, exactly. Using Photoshop. See, we've got an expert right here. And what about the last one?
Sex.
Yep. Making love. Yeah, making love. Okay, so again, we're in a very, very hybrid and multilingual and multi-symbolic mode as we look at all these examples. This is one that's right around the street from my office at Berkeley. And I'm not sure if you have this chain here on the East Coast, but this is Quantico Lead. And so the idea here is that when these characters don't, they don't mean quickly, but the sound of it, I mean, it's something like good possible standing, something like that.
Fast possible standing.
Oh, fast possible standing. Okay. So the idea here is that you're using the phonological value of these characters to resemble an English word. But the fact that these are juxtaposed, it's not just, you've got the idea of fast food, and you've got tapioca drinks and so forth. So there's this mélange, this hybrid notion that it's quickly, but it's quickly in an with an Asian flavor. And so these characters become sort of part of the total thing. So it's more than just if it just said quickly. This is around the corner from a couple summers ago when I was in Lyon. They've got La France, lol. So here, LOL is not being used as a laughing out loud, literally, because laughing out loud is English. But lol has taken on, as a unit, any kind of thing where you are ridiculing or making fun of. And so, kids on the playground in schools in France, if someone falls down, they might say, lol, pointing their finger at the poor kid who's, fallen down. Well, here it's being used as La France, lol. So it's kind of making fun of France. So it's a complete transformation of how LOL originated in electronic chat. And here there's nothing electronic about this particular context. Okay, so I want to spend a few minutes talking about this exchange. This is a Facebook exchange between 3 young Egyptian women. One lives in Berkeley, is an undergraduate. Another is studying pharmacy in Cairo. And the third is also in another town, another city in Egypt. And I just put down here to explain why there are numerals. This is another use of numerals because in the Arabic-speaking world, the cultures are diglossic. So there's modern standard Arabic, which is written in Arabic script, and that is used by the media, television news broadcasts, and so forth, religious texts. But the language that the people speak is not modern standard, but it might be Levantine, it might be Gulf, it might be Maghreb, all different varieties of colloquial Arabic. And these colloquial forms don't have their own writing system. And so the idea here is that with electronic writing, oftentimes people who want to express themselves in their colloquial language will often use Roman script. But because Roman script does not cover all the sounds that are needed, they borrow from the Arabic numeral system, because there is a physical resemblance in some way or another between the numerals and these sounds that are needed for the inventory in order to have a complete system. So let's take a look at this first example here. So Ragda is writing to her friend Marina, and she says, Dr. Marina, because she's studying pharmacy. She's not actually a doctor at this point in time, but she's saying, Dr. Marina, my darling, literally my life. How are you? How are you doing? There is a high probability that I will spend the month of August in Egypt. And this is interesting because you've got month 8. So the 8 here is not phonological. It's actually referring to the 8th month. And then she says, probably, and then has a double smile. And so what would be the effect of saying probably?
Because we don't have it in Arabic.
Right.
We don't have
But there's no p sound. So the idea is that you substitute the B to what effect? Well, it is funny, and so Ragda takes this definitely as humor, that as she says this, but it's also creating a certain bond between them, as we'll see in the next message. So she says, probably, I miss you so much, really. Come and study for me. I need your help, doctor. And then she ends with a smile. Okay, so then Marina answers. So after this long time in America, and you still say probably. So the idea, Ragda never says probably when she speaks English. You know, she speaks English perfectly well. But the idea here is that she is accentuating her Egyptian identity and her outsideness to English as she is talking with her friend Marina to create a bond of solidarity. I am so happy, smile, smile, but I pray that probably will become sure. And it's interesting that here she uses the English, so I've put in red the English words that go into these expressions. And then she says ISAAA. So ISA by itself is inshallah. But when you prolong, but the idea here is that they're prolonging the Allah. Okay, so but it's I think this is an amazing abbreviation. And this you find all over the place in Arabic online texts, this ISA for inshallah, followed by a smiley. So inshallah is God willing. And my daughter, I think I'm the one who needs someone to explain things to me. It's over. My nerdy days are over. And so she says this in colloquial Egyptian, and then she repeats it in modern standard Arabic for emphasis. So here, again, it's incredibly multilingual because you've got all this English that's being worked in, but then you've got this alternation between dialect and modern standard that is being worked in a back and forth way, along with internet language. So all the emoticons, the KK for kiss kiss at the end. So we have at least 4 sort of language systems operating simultaneously here. So Marina here is teasing Ragda about her use of probably. And then she says farheti, which is right here. Ya farheti. So here can be taken to mean I'm proud of you, but in kind of an ironic tone. So she's both teasing Ragda, but also expressing a certain pride in her Egyptified identity that she's expressing through probably, maintaining a clear cultural affiliation with her friends. And then Huda comes into the conversation, and here we've had a little bit of this affective use of repeating letters, but here you see, look at all these repeated letters in the top here. She's saying, shame on you, Ragda, but in a very friendly way. So you are going to say to Marina that you are going to Egypt, and carelessly you don't come see me in my Facebook profile that is just next to hers to tell me too. So I have to get your news from other people's profiles. So the idea here is that there's an imitation of these sort of exasperated, spoken, long, drawn out. And what's also interesting is that vowels are used, whereas typically in Arabic you would not use vowels. You would just have the consonants. But here the vowels are as part of the written system. And so lots of affective dimension here with speech, the qualities of speech being brought in to the writing. But I think it's also interesting the fact that she talks about you were right next door. In other words, they've created a kind of virtual space where it's kind of like dormitory doors on Facebook, where because on the screen they have adjacent little window profile access things that, if you could have knocked on her door, you could have knocked on mine too. It wouldn't have taken that much effort to do that. But she's doing this, of course, in a very teasing, fun, poking way. But I think what's really interesting about this is that they have created online a space that brings them together, even though they're very distant physically. There's a common space where they interact, and it's a space of women. They're not talking about men. There are no men in this space, and they are able to create their own world and interact the way that they want to as women in this space. They reaffirm their Egyptian identity, but at the same time, they're maintaining a certain distance from that Egyptian identity by incorporating these other features, English for one, and as well as the technological discourse features that they introduce. There's alternation between dialect and modern standard Arabic, and so you get this portrait of a very, very complex cultural and linguistic tapestry that they together are weaving for themselves, not for public dissemination as we're doing here. Although they did give me permission to talk about this. Here we have another use of technology for, now this time, language learning. And this is a Texan learning French who calls himself Textfallsay. And he set up a video blog, a vlog, to attract interaction with speakers of French around the world. He has 19,000 subscribers to his vlog. And we're going to see just a little fragment of one of his where he talks about the most unpronounceable words.
Yeah. J'ai voulu faire une vidéo sur ma chaîne Textfallsay parce que j'ai pas fait une vidéo depuis longtemps. Mais ça c'est à cause du fait que je fais des vidéos quotidiennes en français sur ma chaîne every jour. Et en faisant ma vidéo pour aujourd'hui, je disais le français normal et pas mal. Et j'ai pensé que c'était la pire chose que j'ai jamais prononcée. Mais cette vidéo, je vais vous donner une liste des choses qui sont difficiles pour un Américain à dire en français. Le pire mot pour prononcer is, en anglais, it's called a squirrel. Mais en français, on dit écureuil.
Okay, you get the idea. So this, this particular thing attracted 3,651 comments from people. And so here's just a random assortment, but you can see right up here, 3,658. So all kinds of advice on, pronunciation of these different items, but what's interesting is that some of the people noticed that he didn't look like a Texan. So they said, "You don't look like a Texan. You look Chinese," and so. It's an interesting thing too because, so he's of Vietnamese origin, but he lives in Texas and he's learning French. And so he's putting himself out there as kind of a global learner of the language. And it is amazing the global response that he has gotten from this. So he's put out a series of dozens of these video blogs and has attracted huge amounts of attention. So we're not going to have a chance to go through all of these one by one, but these are all on your handouts. So I figured you can take these back and think about these on your own. But these are some of the principles that I've derived from the background that we've talked about. One, that meanings are situated in relational, not autonomous. That language literacy and communication rely on both convention and invention. There's always a tension between these two. If everything's conventional, we get bored. If everything's invented, we have no idea what's going on. So there's a kind of dynamic tension that has to be there all the time between convention and invention. The medium matters. Where you encounter signs, language, and so forth makes a big difference. Text and communications are always multimodal. Obviously, when we're talking face-to-face, it's clear that the communication is multimodal. But even when you have an email, there are lots of things going on there. It's not just the language. A lot of it has to do with physical layout on the screen. And then language technologies and text mediate between the social and the individual, between ourselves and imagined and real worlds, which I will get to in just a couple minutes. But let's just take a look here. The idea here, again, this is reiterating the same thing, but take any word. I mean, café in this case. Café takes on many different meanings depending on where it's situated and how it is used. If we have, this is really easy to illustrate with students if you just put X on the board. You know, what does X mean? Well, it means a whole ton of things. So, you know, it depends on whether you're looking at mathematics. Even within a mathematics context, it can be multiplication, it can be a variable, an exponent. I mean, there's all kinds of things that this could be. And pick a domain, and X will be there, and it will have some varied meaning. So students can get the idea through that. Open-ended questions, where you're asking them, what kind of meaning is this? So, you know, the difference here, referential meaning is like, what are these words referring to according to the way they're being framed in the text? Metaphorical meaning, are the words being used literally, or are they being used metaphorically? If they're being used metaphorically, to what is the referent being compared, and what's the effect of that comparison? Structural meaning would have to do with the particular ordering of the words and what effect that ordering has to do, you know, whether you're using passive voice, active voice, and so forth. Intertextual meaning, what does this text evoke from other texts that you have read? Are there echoes that you have heard in or read in other texts? Social meaning, what kind of meanings are being established between characters in a novel or between you as reader and the author as writer? Personal meaning, what feelings do you have when you, sort of visceral meaning of a text? Symbolic meaning, besides the level of metaphors, how are the textual elements being used in an allegorical or a symbolic or an emblematic way? Can the text itself be considered a symbolic act? Ideological meaning, whose interests are being served by the text? Are the meanings consistent with, or do they challenge dominant discourses, and so forth? So moving on to the next principle, again, this notion that there's always an element of convention and invention as we use language. And so just a couple of things that I talk about in my book, and then on the handout there is some of the sort of practical things you can do is getting students to write about the ways that they adapt conventions for their own specific needs in different communicational situations. And we do this all the time, but we're not necessarily thinking about it. But I think it's beneficial the more we can be consciously aware of the ways in which we use symbols in new ways for which they were not originally intended, but that nevertheless work. Using and adapting conventions, basically making learners aware that they have a certain agency in the development of conventions. Reflecting on how language forms are constrained by material contexts. A lot of the things that we were looking at has to do with this, again, adaptation, but emphasizing the fact that it is impossible to, you know, we're always going to be literate in certain domains, but there is no way we're going to always be literate from the get-go in all domains. And there's always, no matter how experienced we are as a language user, even if it's our mother tongue, there are always new domains in which we will have to become learners. And so even with our native language, we have to become, we have to see ourselves as continual learners. I want to skip down to, yeah, this one about ideologies, because I think this is a particularly important one for foreign language learning. For example, when you're talking about scripts, so when I started auditing a Chinese class years ago, the first day they asked us, do you want to use traditional characters or simplified characters? And we all just sort of looked at each other. Simplified sounds good if it's simple, you know, that sounds like a good thing. But there's no context for what the difference is and why simplified characters were developed. 5 minutes, okay. All right, so so this is really an ideological issue and an historical issue. What does it mean if I choose traditional versus simplified? Well, without knowing it, I am aligning myself with certain areas of the Chinese-speaking world without even realizing it. And so this is an area where the script itself can be useful. In Hindi and Urdu, essentially the same language spoken, but two different writing systems. And the problem is that once you write Hindi Urdu, you express your affiliation with either as a Hindu or a Muslim. So you don't have to do that through your speech, but you do in your writing. So again, writing comes in as an important expression of identity. Arabic and Chinese present the appearance of linguistic unity, but in both cases, there are mutually unintelligible spoken dialects that are subsumed under this writing system. Also, when you look at colonialized people throughout the world, they usually are marked by the writing system of their colonizers. Maybe not, and in some cases the language too, but almost always by the writing system. So all of these relationships between mediums, social practices, and ideologies, and history, I think are very important to talk about. Okay, I'm going to just skip through all this to my conclusions. So on the handout, you've got heuristic questions for relational pedagogy. So just in 2 words, what I'm talking about in a relational pedagogy is looking at the relationships between social, individual, material that give meaning to our uses of language. So we put a lot of stock in the thingness of language. So there's the vocabulary, there's the morphology, there's the syntax, there's the pragmatic rules, there's the genres, and so text types and so forth. So those are all the things that we emphasize, but I think that what needs to be addressed a little bit more systematically in language is we can't get rid of all those things. We have to study the thingness of language, but we also have to look at those invisible connectors, those relationships among the things in a given situation for a particular purpose uttered by a particular person to another particular person, and to take all of those relationships into account in terms of interpreting the full complexity of the language that we teach. And so these questions are an attempt to get at some of those relational qualities. So just to wrap up, the point of this is, you know, as language teachers, we work very hard to prepare our students for the future. But foretelling what the future is going to look like is very difficult, especially in this, you know, our current globalization era where things are changing extremely rapidly and technologies are developing very rapidly. So what I'd like to argue is that to prepare students for the future, we have to also recognize our responsibility to connect them to the past and to look at relationships between past practices, and that means language practices, cultural practices, with present practices, and then through that, when they can see those relationships, I think that they'll be better prepared to extrapolate to future conditions, social conditions, future technologies, in ways that would be hard to prepare for in any other way. So by looking at the similarities across time, and I didn't get a chance to talk about some of the specific ways that this can be done, but that by focusing on these temporal, historical relationships as well as the situational relationships, we can best prepare our students for the future in the very complex world that they face. So I know we've only got probably 1 minute, 30 seconds for questions, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to talk to you outside the room, because we do have someone coming into the room right at this moment, I think. So, all right, thank you very much.